I spent a lot of this week looking at goodness in my own life, how many places it manifests, lots of different ways I see goodness in my life, the folks that I meet and the goodness in them. I had this really beautiful conversation at noon on Tuesday as I taught a class about healthy relationships with the women at Friends of Guest House, and we sat together and they shared part of their journey with me, and I shared a part of my journey with them as we were talking about trust and respect and boundaries and those kinds of things. And there was a goodness in simply being able to listen to other people talk about the lives that they have lived, that have shaped their experience of the world in which we find ourselves. It was good. On Tuesday night, I do Soul Space online, and I sat with a group of folks, and we struggled with all the things that are going on, certainly in the South here, with the aftermath of the hurricane, still getting assistance in for folks. I spent part of my week trying to live in the goodness despite all the disinformation and misinformation about what was and wasn't assistance happening in places. All those kinds of things, looking for goodness. I spent the week in preparation for that. And that, if I'm being honest with you, at the end of this sermon, I'm going to give you two assignments. One is to look for goodness in your life, and one is to manifest, make real goodness in your life. Because as I studied this word goodness, I looked at a number of different translations from Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, which is the verses that talk about all the fruits of the Spirit. Some of them translate the word goodness, and some of them translate the Greek word as generosity. And the reason behind it is there's a thrust to this word for goodness. And it's a two-pronged thrust. One is intrinsic goodness, the part that's good inside of you, but also, and a sort of a moral goodness as well. But then there's an outer thrust, a beneficent thrust, a thrust about doing good, giving yourself away to make the world a better place. That is a way of manifesting goodness. So we'll talk about that in greater depth once we've read the text together. So I'm looking together today in the Minor Prophet. They're called minor prophets because of the size of their books, not because they don't matter. You know, we think of minor and major in our lives as major is really important and minor not so much. That's not the way it is. Just Isaiah had a lot to say and Micah didn't. So Micah in chapter 6, verse 8. Listen to these words. I'm going to read them to you twice. Listen to them both times and hear what echoes for you in this particular text. Listen here, mortal. God has already made abundantly clear what good is and what Adonai needs from you. Simply do justice, love kindness, and humbly walk with your God. One more time. Listen here, mortal. God has already made abundantly clear what good is and what Adonai needs from you. Simply this: do justice, love kindness, and humbly walk with your God. I think we need to be reminded regularly what goodness is. And the reason we need to be is because our own propensity is to rush to the bad news. The bad news. You know, the places where we keep tripping up. And part of that is it's that old newspaper adage which carries over into all things. If it bleeds, it leads. If the story is about bad things happening to people, then it leads. It is the big story. If it's bad, it's really easy to get people interested in it. And it's because of our attention span. Do you know, I've said this to you before, but neuroscience, we have discovered something about our brains, and it's an unfortunate thing. You and I connect with the negative like this. We jump on the negative like that. Somebody tells you something bad about somebody, and you are right in that conversation. You are right in there. But somebody says something good, and it just kind of slips away. You have to dwell. It takes a nanosecond for your brain to catch on to the negative. It takes somewhere between 10 and 20 seconds for you to catch on to the good and connect to it. So no wonder, throw a bunch of negative stuff at us and we are on that like anything. We are all over it, but not so much for the good. And yet one of the fruits of the Spirit for us that we are meant to manifest in our everyday lives is goodness. Now, part of goodness is born into us. It is a part of us. We find the evidence of that and it's really not evidence. The Bible isn't evidence. It's faith that points to God. It's not evidence. People I hear citing it all the time, proving this and proving that. It doesn't prove anything to someone. There's no scientific evidence to the Bible. It's not about science. Faith has never been about proving something that you absolutely can see. If we could see God, every single one of us, everybody would believe in God. There would be no question. There's no empirical evidence of God. There are the subtle hints, and we have to be awake enough to catch those hints. Look at a sunrise. Feel the rain on your face after you've been parched on a hot summer day. Watch the sunset over a lake or a river or some other body of water, over a forest as the sun begins to disappear. Stand in a wide open field blooming with all kinds of wildflowers. That's subtle evidence of God's presence and creative energy and all around us, but we call it faith for a reason. And that's because it's not proof. It is an experience of reality that you have to be awake for and plug into and connect to at the deepest level. We can believe in Jesus. Not a single one of us. I know you think I'm old, but I did not hang out with Jesus personally. I did not walk around with him. He and I hung out a lot. We hang out a lot now. But Jesus, the physical embodiment of Jesus 2,000 years ago, I read about through the eyes of faith of all the gospel writers and Paul and all of the letter writers of the New Testament. I read about their experience of faith. And what I know about it is if I'm open, I can really experience faith too. I can experience God's presence in ways that move and touch me even now. The reason we keep books that are that old and imagine they're powerful is because they speak of an experience that we can all have. We can all have the experience of God's goodness. We can all know God personally and connect with God. I can't put some test tubes together and pour some things and then prove to you beyond any scientific reasonable doubt that there is one called God. But I can tell you, I know there is. I know. For me, I have experienced the reality in such a way there is not a moment in my life in which I am not immersed in God's Spirit. Now, The beginning of Genesis is a story of creation. And while oftentimes you and I get caught up on the idea of perfection, that's not even a word in the Hebrew Bible. Good is. Perfect, Plato came up with. Plato, by the way, a non-religious, if you will, philosopher. A lot of what we've got in Christianity today sometimes is more Plato than Jesus. But that's not for today. When you read that first chapter of the book of Genesis, you get God creating a world and looking at the world God created and calling it good, 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 and on day 6, very good. God sees in creation goodness. It's inherently in us. And the goodness that's planted in us is the image of God, which all of us bear. Every single one of us, online, in person, whenever, wherever, the image of God is in us. An aspect of God's image dwells in us. I cannot know God without all the images of God in part all around me. Or at least, maybe I can know God apart from that. But I come to know God more deeply when I look at all the ways God has chosen to reflect God's image in each of you that I can see, and in each of you I cannot. You reflect some aspect of the divine image. Some aspect of it comes through you. You can't reflect the whole thing because God's infinite, you're finite. But you can reflect some aspect of God's goodness just by being you. And that's the inherent part of us. All the inherent goodness in us. All of the mystics speak about something that is untouchable deep inside of us. That image of God, that ember that connects us to the eternal is always there. It's untouchable. And it's the fire by which God kind of invades our lives. That's the inherent goodness. You are born with that. And nobody can take that away from you. You can act like it's not in there. We've all seen that. We see it all the time, sometimes in ourselves. But you are born with an inherent goodness. But then we are called as well to a kind of goodness that looks like doing something about it. Now, did you hear the echoes of that in the Micah passage I read to you about what God wants from us? God has already made it abundantly clear, according to the text, what good is and what God needs from us, wants from us. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Those are all active ways of engaging the world. Goodness can be inherent. It's a part of you. But goodness that isn't lived out maybe isn't fully the goodness that the fruit of the Spirit demands of us, asks of us, invites us to live into. Goodness looks like the way I treat you, the way I speak to you, whether or not I listen to you and engage you, whether I'm really present in the moment with you. It's also about how you engage me, how you engage each other, how you engage the world, how you engage prayer and Bible reading and all the things you might do with your life, how you engage the person that waits on your table. Sorry about that. I felt my microphone slipping off my ear. It's how you engage the world. Goodness is both inside you and a way that you express who you are with others. Lord knows, Linda and I, originally we had a plan for dinner last night. Then Josh tells us that, the dinner plan has to go last night because he'd been invited to a friend's birthday and he forgot to tell us, which was perfectly fine. These things happen, and so our dinner plan changed. And Linda and I decided we would go grab dinner somewhere, so that's what we did. And we went to a place that we love to go and eat. Only it seemed like we couldn't decide which one of the waiters or waitresses was really ours. Someone came and apparently got our drink orders before I even came in, and it was waiting for me when I came in. And then a woman kind of stopped by and just kind of haphazardly said, "Are you ready to order? What do you want?" And then she never, ever came back to the table. She never, ever came. She took our order, and she never came back to the table. She looked at me every time she came through the door, but she never came back to the table. So then I couldn't decide, is she our waitress? Now our food came, and it was delicious, busboys and poets. I mean, there you go. It came to us, but she never, ever came back to the table. She looked at us a couple of times, but that's it. And then finally, the young man checked on us twice during dinner, but he really never, there was no engagement. I'm used to conversational waiters and waitresses. Maybe that's me. My children tell me I could make friends with a brick wall. And, especially if we could talk back a little bit. But I was missing. And yet everything about my meal experience was good. But I was starting to lose my patience a little bit. And I said to Linda, wow, if we don't even know who our waiter or waitress is, how are we supposed to decide how we're going to tip them? Tipping is kind of expected anymore, but is it really expected if I see you by the end of dinner and a couple of engaged conversations, and the woman stopped one more time and gave me a box to put my take-home in, and I was like, okay, this is time for me to be good. I've been looking for it all week long, and it escaped from me at dinner last night. It escaped. It just ran away. I might be inherently good sometimes, but sure last night it wasn't dancing outside of me. I never said anything, don't get me wrong, didn't say anything bad to the waiter, didn't say anything bad to the waitress, but I said bad things to my wife, who was enjoying dinner with me. And so I did not manifest goodness last night. I'm sorry. I admit it to you freely. We all lose our patience sometimes. I'm not making an excuse for how I behaved last night. I'm not. I just know I can do better. And confession is really good for the soul. And if I can't confess to you, I don't know who I can confess to. The truth is, it's hard to manifest goodness all the time. These fruits of the Spirit that we want to ripen in our lives are really easy sometimes. It's really easy to be kind when a beautiful little yellow lab or labradoodle or some happy dog walks up to us, unless you're allergic, and just leans. We have this wonderful dog in our neighborhood, Lincoln, who just loves to walk up to you. He has never met a stranger, and he leans. He's a leaner. I don't know if you know about dogs that are leaners, but those are the ones that really just like to come up against you, and they're just leaning on. Lincoln is a leaner, and he loves to be petted, but once you're done with him, he either keeps pressuring you to pet him some more, or he goes and finds someone else and leans on them. And that's perfectly all right, but kindness is really easy to a dog. It's easy to be, some of them are really easy, but what about the rest of the time? What about the rest of the time when it's hard to manifest goodness because you're tired or because things aren't quite going the way you want them to? Those are the moments that we have to look extra hard for goodness. And that's why founding ourselves in the presence of God every day, even maybe reading the list. It's not that hard to find Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. And then begin. This is why we're doing one fruit at a time, and we're doing them in reverse order. I look for self-control in my life now because we talked about that first. I look to see when I am controlled and when I'm not. And this whole week, I measured my life against how did I do? I know I'm intrinsically good, made in God's image. That's clear from Genesis 1. But how did I do in letting that goodness out? You know, that whole put your candle on a light stand, you know, you're a light for the world, don't hide it under a bushel, that kind of whole dance. That's exactly what goodness is about, letting it out. How good was I at letting it out? At my noontime class, Healthy Relationships on Tuesday, I was batting maybe not 1,000, but 900. You know, unheard of in the major league. Batting 900. And then I went to dinner last night, was batting 1, and that's not too good. One less than, that's just not good. Just one hit in 1,000, I would lose my job immediately. And thank goodness, my whole life is not last night's dinner. You're going to succeed in goodness sometimes, making it real in your life, the way you talk to others, treat yourself. You're going to win. And sometimes you are going to drop the ball big time. That person is going to push your last button, and it's not really their fault. Sometimes you've had your button pushed all day long by a variety of people that you were able to be patient with. Oh, patience is another week. We got to wait for that. I'm sorry. That, you made it through all those, and you manifested goodness with each one of those conversations, and then you get to your evening meal, and boom, something other than goodness comes out of you. It's worth cultivating. There's a reason why they're called fruits. Besides the fact that Paul and Jesus were really madly in love with the idea of when you're talking to folks who are familiar with agriculture, you speak to them in a language they understand. Cultivating, fertilizing, those kinds of things make sense. If you're going to cultivate a garden, now I am the last person to give gardening, as you all know about me. I'm the last person to give gardening tips. If you want to kill a plant, give it to me. But it takes cultivation. It takes pruning. It takes attention. You can plant some things in the spring in a garden, and if you never look at them again until the end of the year, you might get something by the end of the summer at harvest time. But you might find that whatever you planted is choked out by weeds, has been eaten by all the bugs. I mean, the fruit has rotted on the vine because you didn't pay any attention when it actually came to fruition. You have to cultivate. You have to pay attention. You have to look at things. The reason we're talking about the fruits of the Spirit is because you need to cultivate them. So this week, your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to first look for the goodness in yourself. What is it about yourself that you can claim as the goodness that's unique to you, that God has given you as a gift? What is that goodness in you? Is it the ability to listen to people, to be present in the moment? Is the goodness in you, does it manifest in the way that you give of yourself, in the way that you are generous in your spirit? And then after you've looked at the goodness inside of you, look at the ways you manifest it. How generous is your spirit? What does your generosity look like? For some of us, generosity looks financial. We have, so we give away. Sometimes it's prayer. For all of us, it could be prayer. Generous in our prayers about the folks who are still recovering and who are unknown in the midst of Appalachia. Who would have known that one of the biggest difference makers in the 21st century would be mules? But in parts of Appalachia they can't get to, mules, manifesting God's goodness. Mules. Mule trains going up and taking stuff with them on their back. Places cars can't get to, helicopters can't land at, but mules can get to and check on people and make sure they have the basic necessities. I was reading about that yesterday. goodness? How are you being generous with your life? Are you being generous to your friends? Are you being generous to the community in which you live? Generous in your family? Generous with your prayer? With your concern? Generosity flows from us in the way we manifest our goodness to others. So look for ways to be good. Look for ways this week to be good. Maybe even ask yourself the question in a given moment, what's good? What's good for me to do right now? And if you lose all other track, come back to Micah 6:8. God has made abundantly clear to us what is good and what God wants from us. To do justly or to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Whether you fail or succeed, getting back up knowing God invites you to continue to manifest goodness. Continue.